Hey guys, Pat here with a video response to Matt Combs' 13 Reasons Why video. I'm going to link it in the description down below. If you guys haven't seen it, I encourage you to pause this video and head on over to there, watch both parts, and then come back. This video is largely in response to part 13, the 13th reason in his video, which is because it's Bandai. For those of you guys who don't know, I say it sometimes in my older videos, and then also I've said it on various other forms of media, but I used to play the Naruto Shippuden card game, which was Bandai's previous game, and I was pretty vocal about some of the problems that that game had, and eventually it led to me getting a design and a tester position with the company to help eventually fix the game and turn it around from a pretty horrendously stale competitive meta. And the reason I am bringing this all up is because I met with the design team for this game, Super, 6 to 7 months ago in Hartford, Connecticut, and I tried to, you know, show them and explain to them some of the pitfalls that the previous game had. They're a completely different dev team, by the way, than the Naruto team. Completely different dev team, just so getting that out of the way. And I tried to explain to them the pitfalls that the Bandai CG NA team had, and in hopes that they wouldn't make the same mistakes, and try to convey to them designs and ideas for things that the game needs in order to succeed. So by avoiding the pitfalls and by, creating these interesting cards or cards that are necessary for the game, it will open up interesting play patterns, and it will be, a non-linear gaming experience that, will reward skillful play. That was the eventual hope of the game. And unfortunately, I don't think I'm, seeing that 6 to 7 months later, which is why I largely agree with a lot of things that are in Matt's video. But for right now, though, I want to give you guys an idea of where I'm coming from, show you guys some of the pitfalls from Naruto. So if you guys don't want to listen to a history of Naruto cards, have no desire, by all means, I'm not going to fault you if you want to skip ahead or just get rid of the video, just turn it off now entirely. But I do highly recommend you at least humor me and listen to a couple of the previous cards from the previous game, so that you can understand why some of us who used to come from that community are a little bit frustrated. So let's just go over some of these cards, and you can see why I was trying to caution Bandai to not fall into these same patterns. So the first card is Comparative Strengths. It's an Earth card, costs 1. Counter target one ninja. So when one ninja is played, which is a battle card, when your opponent plays a battle card, you can respond with this card. Attach this card to the target. The target's effect text is changed to the following, and it's just some junk effect. This card is basically, when you play it, your opponent's effect text is negated until the end of the turn. This card is Cold Bloodlust, and I knew as soon as this game came out, Cold Bloodlust was basically comparative strengths, which dominated an entire meta, and it was largely dominant because in the meta that comparative strengths was in, there was no good answer to it. It's just you played a guy, it got comparative strengths, you just accepted it. It wasn't until I think like 4 or 5 sets later when we got Hina that there was actual good permanent removal. So this card basically just it came down, blanked your guy, not really anything you could do about it. Just solid card, and it was, you either played it or you just had to play around it. So again, same thing as Cold Bloodlust. Not really any way to combat Cold Bloodlust. Moving on, we have Naruto Overflowing Chakra. This is basically barrier. As you can see, this last line of text here, this ninja cannot be affected by your opponent's effects. That's basically barrier. And how Naruto was before this card came out is that you would have cards like Gaara Tragic Name that would come down on 2, and they could spot remove cards. And then, on 4 to 5 or 6, you would get cards like Kakashi or Gaara Immense Power or Third Hokage or Kisame or any of these other characters that could just completely, wipe the board. Removal was, pretty strong, pretty prevalent in the game, so nothing could really stick around. And if you just got hit by a bunch of removal, you weren't coming back. It's very reminiscent of how this game felt for the first 2 sets, where there's just good cards just remove things just for the sake of removing them. So you couldn't play your super sweet Naruto deck based around Naruto and casting Rasengan or Sasuke and using Chidori. You couldn't play those decks because They needed a specific character in play, and the second you played it, it just got blown up by a removal. So Bandai's solution was to just print a card that couldn't be targeted by anything. And then Naruto ended up, being the best deck in the format because it was untargetable. It could remove your things, you couldn't remove its things. So then the only thing that was viable was the Naruto decks, and then going forward, any character that was printed that didn't have the overflowing chakra effect text, which is basically, again, barrier, wasn't playable. Because if you're not playing a deck that's uninteractive and is susceptible to removal, it's not good. So what ended up happening is they tried to silver bullet it with a card like Control of the Nine-Tailed, which is in 2 colors. So basically, most decks can play this comfortably, mainboard or sideboard. Comes out early, turn 1. It stays in play. Your opponent cannot play ninjas with overflowing chakra or tell beast force. So basically, you couldn't play barrier characters. That's how you deal with it. That's how Bandai's solution. That was their solution to get around it. And this card was actually a promo given to you. Like, if you just showed up at a local shop, you just got a play set of this card. They wanted to make sure it was easily accessible. Everybody could get this card. And when it was shown, people were really overjoyed because they're like, okay, finally, the broken card is not going to see play. You guys, they were complaining about it. Great, it's finally dead now. You just main or sideboard Control the Nine-Tailed, done. The card's not going to exist anymore. So what ended up happening is it scared people off of the strategy, but some of the more competitive players were just like, okay, so how about this? You have to draw the card. I'm going to put the onus on you to draw the silver bullet, and if you don't draw it, I'm just going to do the degenerate strategy anyway and win, and I'm not going to go as hard into it now. So, good luck. Like, I have a plan B, basically, if you're going to play this card. And what ended up happening is those decks were still played, just they weren't as prevalent. And since they weren't prevalent, people started to not main or side Control of the Nine-Tailed anymore, and then out of nowhere, it just makes a resurgence. If the thing is broken, you just ban or errata it, like straight up. Don't just try and print narrow answers or answers that basically force the meta into like, a loop. The thing I don't agree with about the silver bullet that was printed today, Corona or whatever her name is that it is completely uninteractable again, has deflect, which is something that should never be printed. We want to increase the amount of interactivity and decision making between players and not restrict it. The game should be non-linear. It should not be linear, repeated play experiences. It's really important for the longevity, the health, and the overall fun of the game. So, moving on, Sasuke State 2. The only line of text that matters on this card for you guys is, while you have no cards in your hand, your water ninjas cannot be affected by your opponent's cards. Okay, so again, it's barrier, but it gives it to everything. It's also an 8/4, which doesn't mean anything to you guys who didn't play Naruto, but he's huge. He's bigger than like every creature in the game. He blocks everything. He basically just attacks, and then on your turn, he and everything else is unaffected, and they're big enough that they can just block no matter what. Your go wide strategy doesn't matter. He's just gonna block them, this should sound familiar to you. This card is King Vegeta. It's literally King Vegeta. It's not, not literally, but you get, it's the same sort of thing. And I know some people are like, but if you have no cards in your hand, well, the thing is, the whole deck is literally filled with cards like Tayuya here and Striking Shadow Snake, that if you have no cards in your hand, you can just play them from your energy. Your energy becomes your hand, and it's not really, like, you're not really paying for it. So, that's the whole thing. It's King Vegeta. So it's just a big beater, gives everything else protection, and all of your cards are basically free in your hand. So that card, what ended up happening was, when it first came out, was top tier, but it wasn't the only deck that was played at the top level. And as players, more sets came out and more things started to get better, and more people got better at playing the deck, it became the only strategy besides trying to cheese your opponent and win in time over. So this card ended up needing to get banned. Like, basically all of it just needed to go. It needed to rotate out because it was just cancerous and toxic to the game. It needed to be changed. Next up is Conqueror Tactician. When you play it, you get to search your deck for a puppet that costs 3 or less, and then during what's the equivalent of the combo step in Naruto, you can just play a puppet that costs 3 or less for free from your hand. So when this card was shown, it basically didn't take players very long to find ways to abuse it and get a very go wide strategy, and it became the dominant card in the metagame. If you weren't playing Conqueror, your deck was just definitely not tier 1. You had to be playing the color that he was in, or you just couldn't keep up. The ability to play cards for 3 or less was incredibly broken, and it was, you know, basically a color full of searchers. Even when they restricted this card to 1, there were other cards that could search out your 1 copy of Conqueror, and you know, if it was in your life, then you were just kind of screwed. Like, you just couldn't win the mirror. It was basically a game of Conquerors. Whoever got it first could do, you know, very powerful things very quickly for free. Your opponent couldn't do it. So, and the reason I am, like, you know, showing you this guy is because a lot of us have already lived through it, and the takeaway from this is you should listen to people that have been through these experiences, and you know, even the ones that haven't, you should listen to your player base and your experienced players. You know, all of this stuff that I'm telling you guys, you can ask some of like the major heavyweights in this game. You can ask people like Jordan Markle, Anthony Hernandez, Eric and Eon Hill, Ryan Severin. These are all people who have lived through this format, and you know, will echo many of the same things. Scott Dashy as well. They will echo many of the same things I'm telling you here. These cards were broken and unhealthy for the game, and it took for players to speak out to Bandai and let them know this is not okay, and you know, we want better, much like what Matt is trying to say in his video. We want better than this, and that is what ended up leading to change. And you know, unfortunately, like I said, we're not seeing this I feel like fast enough. I know that they've heard us loud and clear, and they're trying to make changes, but I don't think they're making the kind of changes that are needed, and they're not doing it quite fast enough. In fact, a good friend of mine, Eric Malone, which some of you guys may know, he was a Titan in the Panini Z community, and he's also a former Naruto 2000. He's the 2010 champion, as you guys can see. He's basically the world champ from 2010 from Naruto. He actually played Dragon Ball Super, and he was excited to play and be a part of this community. But after seeing the state of the game from set 3 onwards, he just saw many of the same problems like I just conveyed to you from Naruto. Lots of uninteresting, uninteractive gameplay, no meaningful choices. So he just said, you know, I'll come back maybe when the game's better. Or, you know, just because right now I'm just not having fun with it. And that's some of the things that Matt was echoing in his videos, and some of other people have echoed as well. And, you know, this card in front of you, Monster Research, is a card that Eric designed for winning worlds. And even then, like, you know, Eric is very much like a competitive player, tries to play what he thinks is the best thing as possible, but like, he also makes sure to infuse his decks with lots of different choices and interesting decisions that can help him throughout the game, and you know, gauge and get information from his opponent, which is something you'd want to see in a card. So Monster Research is reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. Your opponent splits them into 2 piles. You choose one and put it in your hand. For you guys who play Magic, this card is Factor Fiction, and Eric knew when he made this card that it is Factor Fiction. But Factor Fiction is a very strong card at the competitive level, but it also does allow you to get information out of your opponent, seeing what they prioritize, and then on top of it, it gives your opponent information on seeing on what you prioritize. And it's a very skill-based card as well, because there's a lot of decision making that goes into it. So for something so simple, this is a very simple card, you know, it's still very powerful and promotes the kind of design philosophy that I would want to see going forward in this game. And you know, players like Eric, or like even Ryan Severin, Anthony Hernandez, Eric Hill, Eon Hill, Scott Dashy, all those people, these are all things that, you know, experiences that I think people would want to see, because you know, it's healthy for the game, and then on top of that, like I said, it promotes skill and interactivity between players. The silver bullet, like Control the Nine-Tailed, or like the one that was shown today, are really ham-fisted. They just kind of are generic, you know, generic cards that either do nothing or just are really broken and just go in everything, when instead they should have printed something like Shimon Hijiri here, which is players cannot play cards except by deploying them, which is you can only play cards from your hand. You can't Shigesh a guy into play, but you can still play him from your hand normally. You can't play, you know, you can play your Saiyan Teamwork Kaba, but if you find Khalifa, you can't play it for free because you played it off Kaba. It didn't come from your hand. So like these are like the kinds of silver bullets, the kinds of sideboard cards that are good for the game because they promote gameplay. Because the Shimon Hijiri, your opponent has the ability to do their strategy if they can get the Shimon off the board. If they can't, then they can't develop their strategy. It's a back and forth, a give and take. Whereas the new card is literally, I windmill slam it, your whole strategy is dead. Hope it's not in your deck, which is not, fun or engaging for anybody involved. Like I said, at that point, you might as well just ban the Shigesh. Other cards that we need that aren't in the game, Catch Out. Catch Out is just a standard extra card negate. We're basically going into our 5th set, and so far half the cards have been spoiled. The green and the yellow. We still need red and blue, and I guess what little black there's going to be, but there is still no extra card negate as of the time of this video coming out. It shouldn't take this long. It should be a very basic card. Also, I'd like to see cards like Bashfulness. Bashfulness is a counter card that when your opponent plays a high cost card, it puts it on the top of their deck. So this is a card that punishes people for just trying to play, very powerful cards quickly, like the Foreseeing Hit. Like Matt said, you jam the hit down and you just get paid. There's no real build up. There's no real meaningful strategy. It's just my card's powerful. I'm just going to play it. I'm just going to do things. Whereas Bashfulness, if a card like this exists, if you played Foreseeing Hit, you get punished for playing it. So the more optimal play might be, to play 2 2-drops or a 3 and a 1-drop rather than your Foreseeing Hit. Again, just this card's existence promotes strategy and interactivity and back and forth between players. It's very much like how people are saying that the new Silver Bullet card, the Krona, creates this kind of dynamic in the meta. It does that, but it does it in an unhealthy way, whereas a card like Bashfulness does it in a healthy way. It's promoting you to play different strategies. I mean, right now, obviously, low cost cards are very good in the game, so maybe Bashfulness would be not the right play. But if you can see where I'm coming from, it could be a card that's just if your opponent played 2 guys this turn that cost 3 or less, you just KO both of them. So again, it punishes you for taking a certain line. So to get to the point, it has to do with what Matt is saying, and I concur with him, which is you should be demanding more from the game. You should be demanding more as a player. You should not be content with the status quo, because that's how things change. If you don't ever say anything, you're just going to get cut and paste designs. You're not going to get this interactive gameplay experience. I don't know about you guys, but people from my locals are losing interest in this game because everything is just the same repeated experience over and over again, when other games offer much more fun strategical gameplay with a lot of interactivity and a lot of back and forth between players. And like I said, you can get it just by asking for it. I had somebody from my local take a shot at me and say, hey, how do you know? You don't know any better. And like I said earlier, I do, because I lived it. I voiced my concerns to the company, and I was very fortunate enough to actually design for them and bring designs to that game that helped make it better, in my opinion. And so just to give you an example, I'm going to show you a couple of cards that I actually designed so you can understand these are the kinds of effects that you could have in your game, but at the moment we're just not seeing them. So you get this Hinata here. This is a Hinata that I made for Series 24. Basically it's just a big beater, but it also has the effect of you can pay a yellow and sack it to negate basically a jutsu that's being played. So basically an extra card. If your opponent played a removal, you could sacrifice this higher cost card to negate it. So obviously you're going to lose your big beater in exchange for negating it, but it might be worth it. And but the thing is, then your opponent can bait you by trying to get you to try and negate smaller cost cards or things like that. So the card basically also has the built-in effect of if you negate something big like a bomb, you get reimbursed by getting the card back in rest mode, but you can't use the ability anymore unless you find a way to heal her, in which case you can get it back later on. And mechanically the game's a little different, so you can't just keep looping it, but you get rewarded for using the card at the correct time by using an ability that's already printed on a card. It's not just a fire and forget like every ability in this game seems to be. There's actual other things you can spend your energy on other than cards in the game, and that's something I'd like to see. Again, a card like this just kind of promotes do I need the body now? Can I sack the body? Should I, negate the first thing that's played? Should I negate it later on? Like, again, it just promotes interactivity and strategy back and forth between players just by the card being in play. And then we have Turn of Phrase. This card wasn't really that good competitively, but again, you can see that cards have payoff for, adopting certain play styles or certain deck building. So this card, when you play it, you choose one of the effects based on how much damage you've taken. The first one, you basically get to vote for 0. If you have 0 damage taken, you can blow up a field spell. So it's great for, early on in the game. The second ability for 0, you can just ramp. So it's just 2 generic cookie cutter effects that are just okay. Nothing super special. If you've taken at least 3 damage, you get to draw 2 cards. If you've taken at least 5 damage, you get all of the effects on the card. So when you use this card is super important. It has lots of different decisions, lots of little different parts that go into it. You can use it early to get rid of something that is devastating to your long-term game plan, but you're not going to get the high payoff that you get if you hold the card for later on in the game. So again, meaningful, interaction, meaningful play patterns and choices. Next up is Secret Red Technique Puppet Triad. It costs 10. It's basically a board wipe. Reduce the cost by 1 for every puppet you play. This card is basically like Jiren, and which is why I've given a thumbs up to Jiren in a lot of my videos, because the Universe 11 deck is how things should be designed. That is the correct way to design it. There's super amazing payoff for dedicating yourself to a specific strategy. Obviously, it's not the most competitive because of the existence of everything else, but it's really, really well designed. And by choosing to stick to one theme or one strategy, you get rewarded for it with a card that's basically like a I win button, and that's awesome. That's great. And then you have this card like Sasori, which again lends to the same strategy. You can basically pick up all your puppets from your discard pile and put them back in play, which lets this Secret Red technique be really cheap. It lets it's synergy. By playing a deck that lets me have to play one specific type of character, but also grind the game out really long so that I can get my big finisher, it's a rewarding play style. That's different from the norm. It's not just I turn my guy sideways, I attack you, you die. Moving on, same thing. Daroi. Daroi is just, he comes down reasonably late in the game, but as long as he's in play with another lightning character, another different character that shares a symbol with him, he makes them bigger. So if the game gets you grind it out long enough, your guys are just going to be so huge that they're just unblockable, and they're just going to end the game outright because they just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger unless your opponent deals with them. And if you actually happen to have the other card water here, if you have the other color water in play with him, it makes it so that it's harder for your opponent to disrupt your lock. So again, it's a build strategy. I have to be playing these 2 colors, and I have to keep 3 guys alive. But if I do that, I'm inevitably going to win the game. And it's again, different play strategy than just I turn my guys sideways, I play the best possible card, which is what makes it interesting. And the cards I just showed you are all at the rare or super rare level. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be at the high rarity level. I had somebody on the DBX Decks podcast, Mark, took a shot at me by saying hey, the game doesn't have to be Yu-Gi-Oh! Not every card has to be competitive. No, they don't have to be competitive, but every card has to serve a purpose in your set. Whether it's just draft fodder or not, cards should still have purpose. These are 3. The next cards I'm going to show you, these are all commons that I have made for this game, and they weren't even super competitively played. But you can understand that for draft and for people who don't have a lot of cards, they offer you meaningful experiences, and they open up avenues for deck building. So Sukado is just a basic 1-drop, but every time he attacks, he gets bigger permanently. So the longer the game goes on, this card just gets huge. He can win the game outright if your opponent doesn't deal with him, but it has to get that far. So you can dedicate an entire strategy to Sukado and just make him your game-winning card right out the get-go. But you can also choose to abandon him at some point and go a completely different route. Again, different strategy for your type of gameplay. Tamari is again another energy sink card that I'd like to see in this kind of game. Basically, when your opponent plays a extra card, you can pay 2 to negate it and put it back in their hand. So this card's existence just prompts you when you're playing cards to deal with it. You either have to get this off the board before you want to resolve another part of your strategy, or you have to bait the effect, because it's only going to be once per turn. You have to bait this effect to play what you really want to play, and it gives me ways to spend my energy rather than just keep playing battle cards. Like I may only play like 2 or 3, but they all have powerful effects that I can reuse every turn for when I'm not playing battle cards. It's a different strategy than just I need to have more guys on board. Next up is Tamari, another Tamari here. This is also a common. So it has Flashpoint, which is you can remove it from the game, in which case it comes back into play on your side of the field at the beginning of the turn. So as long as it's removed from play, your opponent's extra cards are going to cost an additional 1 to use every turn. However, while it's in play, it's a pretty good blocker. So you have to choose. Do I want the blocking effect, or do I want the control effect? You can't just have one or the other. Again, meaningful choice. I know I keep saying it, but that's the whole point. You can demand more from your game, you can demand more interactivity, you can demand a better game. That's what I think the takeaway, at least for me, was for Matt. And you see the fact that the previous game had all of this. That's why it lasted almost 10 years. Naruto lasted almost 10 years because the players wanted it to keep going. They demanded more from the company rather than just say, oh, you know what, like, it's fine the way it is. Sets shouldn't just be just a ton of chaff and only like very few playables that already slot into broken pre-existing strategies. And that's my frustration with set 4. Is so far the set is just things that lend itself to already broken strategies, silver bullet those broken strategies, or repeated play experiences that we've already seen multiple times before. So yeah, I know this video is dragging on a little bit long, but hopefully you guys took something away from it. You know, I'm very passionate about this issue, obviously, as you can tell. I just want the game to succeed. I just really want it to be the best it can possibly be, and I know that it could be better just because, like I said, I lived it. I've seen other people live it. I'm not the only designer or tester that used to play that game that's still around. So yeah, like I said, if we demand more and we come together as a community, I think we can change it. So that's all I'm going to say on